Hey there, friend. Welcome to another episode of Ponder and Practice. Thank you so much for joining me here today. It is, of course, such a pleasure to be able to share some time with you here. And if you are new around here, welcome. If you are returning, welcome back. Before I kick into what is on the docket for today's episode, first I wanted to just have a little preface, I guess, to what's up next on the channel and what I'm planning on doing with all of this. So Ponder and Practice I started initially in 2019, 2020, somewhere in there, and it was just an audio podcast, which I have since taken down. Unfortunately, I wish I hadn't done what I did. So it's not really available as an audio podcast anymore. And so I thought, well, let me revamp this. The reason that I loved Ponder and Practice as a concept is because it's so important to me that folks are able to do life, engage with life in the way that they want to do it, the ways that they feel called to do it, that are aligned with, their heart and integrity and spirit, and for folks to be able to follow their curiosity in ways that are exciting and make sense to them and have moments of peace and calm and all of these different things, and really lean into the full expression of what it means to be human in a way that is not dictated by someone else, that is not handed down from an authority figure, whether that person be real or sort of this amorphous, whatever information that you're picking up from the media or whatnot. And having conversations about how do we think about life, how are we approaching life, things that we all have to contend with every day that are potentially very difficult and challenging. And so how do we meet these challenges with a spirit of curiosity and grace? This is a really roundabout way, but that's what I'm planning on doing with Ponder and Practice, is basically helping folks figure out how to live their life on their terms so that you don't need to look to outside resources or outside authorities. Ponder and Practice is here to help folks be their own inner authority so that you don't need to outsource that to somebody else, because in the age that we're in and everything that is to come, the information is so decentralized, and we see this happening more and more every day. And whereas before, there were maybe a few people who could reach everybody and be like, oh, this is the story and what's going on in the world. Now we all have the opportunity to pick and choose what information that we want. And we also have the opportunity to find advice if we want to. And we have the opportunity to take a step back and think, okay, well, what is really going to work for me here? And so I'm here to help you do exactly that. You're exhausted with trying to figure out the right way to do things, the quote unquote right way to do things, the morning routines, the evening routines, planning all the things that you're supposed to be doing, getting to the gym, eating properly, making your relationships better, maybe going for walks outside. Maybe you're at a point where you're like, F it, like I'm not going to be able to do all these things, so let me just forget all about it and truck on with my life as it is, whether I like it or not. Or maybe you're somebody who's just like pushing and pushing and pushing all of the time. Like there's always a next milestone to meet. There's always a next goal to get to. And you're doing this to the point where you are sort of invariably like a minor inconvenience away from totally breaking down. Well, my friend, if you relate to either of these spectrums, or maybe you're somewhere in the middle of these two things, you are absolutely in the right place today, because we are going to be talking about how to do self-improvement in a way that doesn't lead to burnout, that lends itself to grace and some ease so that you can make the changes that are right for you in the timing that is right for you. Before we get to the content of this video though, if you relate to anything that I just said and you're like really not quite sure how to make it work, you've looked to all the, all the influencers and all the online resources, maybe you've hired a couple of folks in real life to help and nothing has really worked, it maybe is time to consider booking a human design virtual reading. So what you get with that is a bespoke booklet. It's a PDF file with everything about your human design chart, the implications of all of these things, and for every type of self-help, from when is the best time for you to eat to special considerations for your relationships and how to make sense of your unique productivity strategy and more besides. We are not all wired to do life the same way, and human design is a really lovely way to get a guide map of how your system specifically is designed to work so that you can start to bring more ease and grace into your day-to-day life. And you can get the link to that virtual reading below in the description. So if that sounds of interest to you, check it out, and I will look forward to hearing from you. So Now, back to the reason that you are here, which is to learn these 5 ways to make self-improvement a little bit more peaceful and a little bit more pressure-free. Lord knows we could all use a little bit of a break from all the pressures in our life. There are so many. So, just to give you a heads up, the 5 things are: 1, to identify your values; 2, to disentangle your who from your what; 3, to recognize self-improvement for what it is; 4, to be honest with yourself; and 5, to recognize that slow progress is not the same as no progress, and you might be able to go a little bit faster. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination. There's a ton of information out there and a ton of tools, and I encourage you, if the best case scenario is this sparks something for you, you're like, oh, I should try this other thing out that I've been thinking about. Awesome. That's the best thing. I also do want to provide a disclosure. I am a medical provider, but I am not your medical provider. So of course, none of this is meant to be taken as medical advice. This is purely for informational entertainment purposes only. So please work with somebody who is qualified and licensed in your jurisdiction. But let's get into this. If you want to skip around, I will, of course, also have timestamps down below, so you can do that as well. So the first thing is really to identify your values. There's really no sense in making any kind of improvement at all if it doesn't align with what you think is important. So it's really hard to drum up the motivation to practice piano if you don't care about music or piano. Why would you do that? You wouldn't. It doesn't make sense. Family as a priority is going to outline a very different life than career as a priority. You're going to make different decisions. You're going to choose to put your time and energy into different things because you've identified those values and priorities. Similarly, spiritual connection and community as core values dictate a very different rhythm day to day than, say, would travel and exploration, or van life, or I want to see the world and this sort of thing. Of course, and thank goodness for this, there is some overlap, right? Physical health is something that is going to support your being able to show up for your family, for your community, for you to, work well and do what you need to do at work, and any cognitive function that you need to have, or physical abilities that you need to have that are accessible to you. Similarly, community connection provides support that can facilitate your being able to get up and out and explore a little bit more because you have that sense of safety at home. You're not worried oh my gosh, is this going to be here when I get back or not? I don't know. Maybe you have somebody who can, watch your dog or come feed your cats or water your plants and that sort of thing. And so these things are not standalone, and being able to identify which are the other most important for you is really going to help you be able to decide, okay, what are the things that I do want to prioritize? In my day job, when I work with folks around their health, they will often say, oh, well, I should be running. I'm like, well, why? Why should you be running? Who told you that? And they'll say, oh, well, that's just something that's healthy that I'm supposed to be doing. Okay, well, you're clearly not doing it, and this is a sticky point for you, getting out and exercising regularly, which we've identified already as something that is of value to them, their physical health, obviously, because they're sitting in my treatment room. And so it becomes a conversation of, you don't need to run. There are other ways to meet this value and achieve this goal besides this one thing. And so it becomes a much broader conversation of, okay, well, are there facilities available that you would like to use? Are there things that you have done in the past that you really enjoyed that you would really like to get back to? It makes it easier to specify and outline a plan of, okay, here are the different options that we can do to get there. The more that you can align your values with your actions, the easier those actions will be and the better you'll feel. So maybe a good positive example of this is somebody who really wants to learn how to cook and they want to learn how to improve their diet. Those two things go together really beautifully. If you also happen to be concerned about finances and wanting to make the most of your money, having a steady meal plan and a weekly routine in terms of meal prep and going to the grocery and setting all of that up is going to make a really big difference, and all of those things are really beautifully dovetailed together. Another way that this is often phrased is knowing your why. So why are you trying to do a certain thing? Why are you trying to make a particular change? If you're trying to get up at 5 a.m. any morning because somebody told you what you're supposed to do, or maybe you're trying to make more money and you read, oh, all these billionaires get up at 5 a.m., so I have to do it too. okay, but what's the underpinning there? You have to have some reason, some rationale to like get you up and motivated, even when it's hard, moving in the direction that you're trying to go. So you have to have a direction that you're trying to go, basically, is what I'm trying to get at. So the second piece here is disentangling who from what. And what I mean by this is who you are is not what you do. A lot of times when it comes to self-improvement and, you know, the self-help space and all of this, maybe, you know, spirituality, whatever it is, it's very easy to get caught in this mindset of like, well, the outcome isn't what I thought it would be, so therefore I am broken or shameful or unworthy or whatever it is. And so I see this happen a lot of times with women, particularly women who are very high achieving, and they have this constant stream going in the back of their minds that they're not enough, that they haven't done enough, they haven't checked off enough tasks, all of these different things. And so this is why I wanted to bring this up. Is because of that shame that really is not serviceable. There certainly are some things that are shameful. Those exist in the context that I'm talking about it, you know, not doing 20 things on, like, maybe you had 50 things on your list and you got 10 of them done. That is not necessarily something that is worth being ashamed about. That is a matter of, you know, I have the time that I have, I can do what I can do in that time, and ultimately it's finite, right? Like a day is 24 hours, and some of those hours we need to sleep, and some of those hours we need to be eating and exercising and engaged in different things, talking to our family members, friends, what have you. And so when it boils down to work, you can only do so much in the time that's left over, that's allotted for those different activities, or the other way around. You know, I know there's a lot of folks who have guilt because they're working parents and they feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so ashamed because I can't, or guilty is a better way to say it potentially, but they feel super guilty because they are spending so much time at work and they're not spending enough quote unquote time with their families. And so one way or the other, it's worth being aware of this and really disentangling who you are from what you do. Of course, based on your values, where you choose to spend the time that you have, where you choose to spend the resource that you have allocated to you financially, energy that you have day to day, all of these different things will change. And so that's why like values always come first. And the next important thing here is to really recognize if you are carrying shame or judgment for not doing enough, or this can also show up as doing things quote unquote wrong that are not wrong, right? Like you can cook the same meal several different ways and it will probably be fine. I used to work at a credit union back in the day, and the person who trained me said, oh, there's like 5 other ways to do this, but this is how I do it, and you'll figure out your own way, right? In life, there are some of these processes that, like, there's no one right answer, and so many of us are carrying this internalized belief that there is one right way and it's not my way. For what? So, you know, if you are carrying some shame for not doing enough, for doing things incorrectly, ask yourself, is this valid? Whose voice is it that I'm hearing in my mind? Typically, we pick things up when we're younger. These thoughts, we pick up these thoughts from folks around us who maybe are parents or were mentors or were friends who are a little bit older or siblings or whatever. And so whose voice is it that you're hearing? And can you identify that and kind of like start to question that belief, and in that way make it less intense and sort of loosen the grip that it has on you. The other thing to think about is, what's your identity outside of work? What's your identity in real life when you're offline? When no one's looking, what's the foundation of your character? Like, it's so cliche, but who are you? Independent of the things, independent of the doing, who are you really? What are the interests or curiosities that really spark your spirit, that light you up, that kind of get you jazzed, like, oh yeah, I want to look into this thing, or oh, I want to go, you know, pick up the flute again and see if I can play it, or oh, I want to, you know, learn how to crochet or do some watercolor or figure out my garden or whatever. We all have these things, and sometimes we need to take a step back if we're feeling like things aren't going the way that we want to go, we're not making the progress we want to make. Taking a step back and figuring out, like, gosh, I seem to have lost I've lost a little bit of my spark here. How do I get that back? And it can take some reflection to kind of it can take some reflection to get back to that and to rediscover these things about ourselves. Certainly who you are informs what you do, and this is appropriate, right? It takes a really specific type of person to go to law school, become a lawyer, and spend their days in litigation in the courtroom day to day. Couldn't be me, that's for sure. Similarly, it takes a very specific person to go become a member of whatever religious clergy and then provide spiritual care to folks in hospice who are going through a very unique and potentially difficult moment in their lives, and their family members, providing that kind of spiritual care. That takes a very specific kind of person. Also, probably couldn't be me. And so it makes sense that who we are does inform what we do. And some of the discrepancy that can happen is having been told, oh, this is what you should totally do. A lot of folks, there ends up being a discrepancy between what they were told that they should do and what they actually want to do and what is aligned with them internally. And so this creates a lot of friction, and it can be heartbreaking to see over the years if folks are spending decades in a career that they're like, yeah, I don't really like this at all. It's also really easy to lose yourself in the day-to-day tasks, all of the roles and the responsibilities, and accounting for yourself as kind of the sum total of all of the tasks that you've accomplished over the course of a day. And in fact, you're so much more than that, right? Like, and don't get me wrong, outcomes absolutely matter. And I spent the day today cleaning my house. It needed to be done. My floors were a mess, like this, that, and the other. The specifics don't matter, but I was like, this just needs to be done. And that is the fact of life. There are things that just need to be done. And in order for us to have a sense of purpose and community and like having a space for ourselves in the world, it matters that we contribute in these ways. It matters that we put something out into the world in the ways that we can and ways that are accessible to us. And as human beings, we're certainly far more than what we do, right? Like, who I am is not the same as, how do I say this? My identity is not wrapped up in whether or not I'm able to mop my floors on a regular basis, right? This is something that is important. It is something that needs to be done. And certainly, like, for myself, I think better and just can sort of move better throughout the world when things are clean and tidy and put away. But if I didn't get to that today, it wouldn't make me less of who I am. So, and the same is true for you, right? Like, if there's something that's on your list that you keep going, like bringing it from this week to next week to next week or whatever, that doesn't make you less of who you are. There's something else to be looked at there. Another way to say this is Evie Pomporis, I believe is her name. She used to work for the Secret Service. She has a book out that I started but have not completed yet, called Becoming Bulletproof. And I also saw her on, I think, Diary of a CEO. And she outlined something that she learned in the Secret Service, which is operational thinking as opposed to identity thinking. So the way that she describes it is that identity thinking has to do with the person, right? So my identity, who am I, my feelings, my emotions, my thoughts, all these kinds of things. Whereas the operational thinking is maybe what it sounds like about the operation. Like, what are the outcomes that we need to achieve here? What are the goals that we need to hit? Being able to differentiate that is very helpful, I have found for myself. Since I heard that episode with her, I think, I want to say in December, maybe early January, I don't really remember, but it was tremendously helpful because now, if I get feedback from somebody, it's very easy to click into defensiveness and, oh my God, like, how dare you? And you're hurting my feelings and this, that, and the other. And why would you say such a thing? If you can come out of that and get into a space of, all right, well, this is just operational, right? If I sit down with my husband and we're talking about our budget, it's not about either one of us personally. It's about, okay, here are our goals. Here's what we're trying to do. Here are the outcomes we're trying to hit. How are we going to do that? And so being able to differentiate those two things, I think, is an also really useful part of this conversation of being able to differentiate who I am is not the same as what I do. They're related, but they're not the same. And having that distinction helps to take the charge out of the changes that maybe are necessary to meet the goals that you want to meet based on your values in terms of self-improvement and making positive changes for yourself. Hopefully that makes sense. At any rate, the third step here is recognizing self-improvement for what it is. self-improvement is a tool. It is not a way of life. We are not designed to be like constantly all the time like, oh, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? I need to learn something else. I need to learn something else. Um, the industry, of course, is booming, and hi, yes, I am also part of this problem. So, here we are. But truly, seasons exist for a reason. We're not meant to be in a period of growth indefinitely. Right now in the Pacific Northwest in the United States, it is winter. Like, not a whole heck of a lot is happening outside. The birds are starting to come back, but it is still winter, right? Like, there is not a ton of growth happening. When we get to July and August, we will not be able to keep up with our garden because it will be so, like, so much coming up and so much growing and so much blooming, and the fruit and the veg and all of this, which is lovely. But it's a different season, right? And there's nothing right or wrong about either of these seasons. It's simply how life goes. And so it's really important to recognize that unfettered growth is pathological. Hello, Cancer, right? That's what Cancer is. It's unfettered growth. It's when the cells have gone wonky and they cannot cut back and tamp down the excess growth that is happening. It's really okay to simply live your life for a bit, take a step back, take a breath. This is something that is written into all of creation, which a lot of us would prefer to forget that we're a part of. We're not separate from it. So being able to recognize this is happening in the natural world can be really helpful to start to internalize this, that rest is part of the name of the game. If you are someone who is looking incessantly into self-help resources, I would question the intention of that. What is the information that you're trying to get that you maybe, if you take a minute and think about it, that you already know? A lot of times, excess searching and excess of like, oh, I gotta find this person's thoughts about it and what did they think about it, and I gotta ask 10 people about it, and oh, I found this podcast that talks about it too, is from a place of not being willing to trust your own knowing. A lot of times, most of the time, I venture, even if you're out of practice tuning in, you already know what you're trying to get at. Taking a step back and sort of shutting off the external information can help to tune into that. And, recognizing that self-growth, self-improvement, like, it is an industry. There is marketing that is designed to look really nice and bright and shiny and new, and it's there because it works. And so being able to call that out for what it is, recognize it, and say, you know what, I'm just going to let this ride for a while and see kind of what evolves. And then when it's time for me to make a change, check in internally first to see what is going to make sense here. The companion to that third point is that slow progress is not the same as no progress, but there does come a moment when it's time to move. There does come a moment when it's like, all right, let's hit the gas, it's time to go. Just as much as a fallow season is part of the annual cycle, so too is the growth season. And so if it's been a long time and things are kind of stagnant and feeling stuck and like, nothing's really going where I want it to go, it's time to get moving. And it really behooves you to be in alignment with your system and the season of your life. And maybe if you're lucky, this lines up as well, kind of with the cultural season and with the natural seasons. It doesn't always. Sometimes we're on a different sort of timeline than the world around us is, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But it behooves you to ask yourself, like, are you actually tired and in need of rest, or is there something that you're avoiding? Is there a change that you know you need to make and you're just like, oh, I don't want to, I'm feeling afraid, or like, there's a change you need to make and you're feeling like that's, I don't know how to do this, right? Like, is there uncertainty involved? What emotion is there that you're maybe like, oh, no, I don't want to do this. Often it's a matter of not knowing how to fit something in, not knowing how to, take the small steps to move forward in that direction. Sometimes it's a matter of just being afraid that, like, if things aren't what they are now, what will they be? I don't know. And so that can be super scary as well. All of this is totally valid and makes a lot of sense. And being able to call that out for what it is and recognize, okay, it's time for this to change. And this is where we can get into like having a little bit of that stern talking to with yourself. Like, this is what it is. It's time for me to change. I'm not quite sure how this is going to go, but let's dive in and see, like, if I can make one small step in that direction, what would that look like? And it is like small bit by small bit by small bit. And only you can know, right? Like, only you can know for yourself if you are in that season of, yeah, I need to take a step back and rest, or it's time for me to go. Or super practically on a day-to-day level, right? Like, this is somewhere I run into it a lot, is I don't want to go to the gym. And my fallback option is always, I'm too tired. And it's like, okay, Catherine, like, really? Are you really too tired? Or you just not want to go because it's going to be busy there, or you have a routine and it might be messed up because it's a different time of day, and like, that feels uncomfortable. Like, come on, you can go, like, get it together. It's going to be fine. And I do think that this is a place where understanding your human design can be a super good tool as well, because it really does provide a framework for how your system functions energetically, and not in like a woo-woo kind of way, but in a super practical, like in the weeds, what kind of physical and mental effort is appropriate or ideal for you to expend, and how do you know when you're sort of tipped over into like, oh, I put out a little bit too much today and I need to reel it back in. Or, yeah, I've been doing a lot of resting. That's great. But like, I gotta go. It's time. It's time for me to go. And how do you get more energy if you are in a space where you're like, okay, you know, there are outcomes I need to hit, right? Like, I have deadlines, I have work. This isn't forever, but for this moment, like, I need to like pedal to the metal and get through this particular moment of my life. So human design can really help to suss out, like, how do you get more energy when you're in some of those spaces, and how to put that to practical use, which is, I think, super cool. So the fifth and last thing I want to talk about here is, I have alluded to as we have gone through, but it is so important and we need to talk about it explicitly, is you got to be honest with yourself. Blind spots and avoidance are super real, and it can be difficult sometimes to be really honest with yourself. In my experience, there is one tried and true way to really pick up on if you're telling yourself some lies, right? So there are emotions: defensiveness, jealousy, anger, resentment, fear. These are all really good clues that, I don't know, maybe you want to pay some better attention and see if there's a different way to go about doing something. Feeling defensive, maybe for being called out, like maybe if you've been drinking a lot and somebody's like, oh, like, are you okay? It seems like you're drinking a lot more, and like clicking into that defensive space. You probably already know that you're drinking too much and it's not good for you. And, you haven't come to a place where you're like, oh yeah, I need to change this. And so this is a good clue, that defensiveness. Also, being afraid to like maybe finally go and take an art class because you don't want to have your work critiqued. Okay, that fear is a really good clue. Like, this is something that, yes, is potentially tender, but also something that matters. We tend to not, things we don't care about don't carry an emotional charge. And so if something is carrying an emotional charge in that way, this clues us in, like, oh, okay, like, let me work this out. Let me figure out this fear and kind of work with it. What is it here to tell me, and how can I move through it? Anger is also a really good clue that maybe there are some boundaries that need to be reevaluated. Maybe there are some relationships that need to be renegotiated. I don't know. But, the point of all of this is, if you can allow these emotions to come up, and the second piece here is let them take some space without reacting to them. If you can allow these emotions to come up, give them some space without reacting to them. This is very important. It's very hard. It's very, very hard. And it's doable. And so if you can practice that skill, this is a real key to honing in on, are you really being honest with yourself about what's going on? Emotions don't come up for nothing. They just don't. And so being able to recognize what's what is so, so, so helpful. And the more you're able to recognize your emotions as the guides that they are, the more on track you'll be to be able to take effective action to self-correct as you go. So there we have it, my friend. These are 5 tools that I have found helpful to find the balance between pushing, and always be improving. And, you don't stop till you're dead and all of that, right? Like, there's a time and a place for that. And the other end of the spectrum where it's, it's not going to work anyway, so why bother, right? There maybe is also a time and a place for that. And there's a wide span in the middle where it's, yes, sometimes we're pushing and improving, sometimes we're taking a break. And so being able to recognize those differences and recognize those seasons and align those when it is time to grow, like, is this aligned with my values? And when it is time to rest, am I resting in a way that is going to rejuvenate and replenish me for when it's time to go again and like hit the gas and, be at full power. Like I said up top, it is a pleasure as ever. If you would like to get your virtual human design reading, check out the description. The link will be in there. If you have found something in here today that you resonate with, that you liked, that you found helpful, please like and subscribe to the channel. I will be releasing an episode every other Sunday. And then as I kind of get my own system figured out, we'll eventually get to every Sunday, but I'm sort of trying to get my own my own timing and like when do I rest, when do I work kind of stuff sorted out. And also, if this is something that you have struggled with, like finding that sweet spot between like, oh, I need to be making improvements and changing all the time, or like, oh, I don't want to do any of it, how have you navigated that? What are the tools that you have found super helpful to find that middle ground? Or are you like swinging to end? I'd love to hear your thoughts and what has worked well for you. Or if there are things that you're like, this is what I'm struggling with, I'd love to hear that too, because maybe we can talk about it in a future episode. So take good care, and I will look forward to catching you in the next one when we will be talking about a topic that is super close to my heart, which is a holistic view of psych meds. So stay tuned for that. Take care. Bye.